That spark of innovation, it's just waiting for the perfect combination of tools and talent to bring it to life. Welcome to Pitch, Build, Scale. I'm your host, Chris Fanchi, a recovering startup founder, veteran SaaS marketer, turned dev tech enthusiast and growth specialist. Each episode, we connect with the builders, the visionaries, and the problem solvers who are redefining what's possible with today's technology and pioneering the websites, apps, and software products of tomorrow. These are the conversations that transform how we build, how we sell, and how we scale technology businesses in a world where the tech evolves by the minute. Ready to stay ahead of the curve? This is Pitch, Build, Scale. Hello and welcome to today's episode. We have a very exciting guest. For those of you just joining the podcast, we are Big North Marketing and specialize in helping dev shops and SaaS companies scale their revenue. So if you want to learn how to take your SaaS or dev business to the next level, make sure to stick around. And if you're interested in a free growth consultation, just drop us the word growth in the DMs. We're really excited about today's guest. Dave Todaro is a best-selling author, Agile expert, and master instructor at Caltech. He's the founder of Ascendle and someone who's been in the trenches of software development since age 11, when he wrote his first program. Dave's teams have shipped award-winning products across the industries, and now he helps dev leaders around the world reliably deliver high-quality software. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris.
So you've had a pretty remarkable journey in software, starting at age 11 and founding your first company at 15. Can you walk us through that early spark? What pulled you into tech so early?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was pretty lucky back in my early days, which was many, many moons ago. We had a computer in the classroom, which was pretty abnormal back then. So I had a very visionary fifth grade teacher. She had and this is going to date myself, a TRS 80 Model 3 way back when. This was in the early 80s. And she started teaching us how to program, and I just immediately fell in love. So I started toiling away and got a computer at home, a Commodore VIC-20, soon to be Commodore 64. Some more dating myself there from the early 80s. And then my father was a camp director for an overnight camp, and I would watch him sit at the dining room table and type out the 3-part carbon copy forms for the registrations for the entire summer. And I looked at that and I thought, maybe a computer could help out with that. And so I created a database-driven system to manage all the camper registrations, brought out the dot matrix printer, and he could put the form in, hit print, and it would just zip off the printed forms. And that really started me down the path of, I think, what a lot of us in technology love, which is seeing a problem that a human is facing, applying technology, and making that process faster, more efficient, more enjoyable, so that we're removing pain and frustration from the folks involved in trying to achieve some outcome. And that really, from that early age through today, is what drives me.
So what would you say is the most defining moment of your career that helped shape your approach to building software?
So I think there were a couple of things. That was certainly the genesis, watching my father at the dining room table. I think on the negative side of things, and this is actually tying into the preface of my book, was when we were using a waterfall process and we had built this awesome product over 4 years. We had shown it to focus groups and gone on site and watched our customers battling the challenges that we were solving. And I really didn't have any way to predict how long it was going to take. I did my best, but at the end of the day, I gave leadership one date and we were 7 months late, and we were thrilled. We had stayed up late at night, come in on weekends, busted our butts to get this product done. It was finally done, and the CEO said, "That's great, but it's 7 months late." I mean, talk about bursting the balloon.
Yeah.
I was pretty upset at first, but then I reflected and I realized that he was right. When we don't have the ability to understand how long something is going to take, and we're not focusing on the most important things and getting releases out the door more quickly, we are handcuffing the company, because at the end of the day, unless we're in an academic or research setting, it's about making money. If we're not putting product into users' hands, we're not making money. So although we were toiling away and very proud of ourselves of what we were building, 7 more months of revenue would have meant a lot to our small company.
So what was it that caused the delay? Was it being overly ambitious with the project, not understanding the complexity that was gonna go into it, or just including too many features? What caused it to take too long?
Yeah. So again, this is back in the waterfall days, many moons ago. This is one of the things that got me so fired up about learning and applying agile techniques. So through that lens of, well, what would I do today? We tried to build too much. We thought that we needed to build everything. And of course, we couldn't possibly release it until it was all done. Today, we know much better. So if I had to do that all over again, instead of taking 4 years to get something out the door, I would have taken 4 months. I would have identified what is the real key problem and let me build one small, tiny piece of that and then put it into customers' hands, which again, as we know today, does a couple of things. One, it proves that someone actually wants the thing that you built. The good news is that people did in fact want the product. It sold and drove a lot of revenue, but we had years long delay in getting that access to that revenue and that proof. So it was pretty risky for those years that we didn't necessarily know that people would use it. So the first thing it does is it makes sure that people actually want it. The second thing is it exposes the most important part of the application to people for the longest amount of time so that we can mature that core key part of the product so that as we have more releases, we can make it better and better and better. And then, of course, the third thing was if they're finding value from it, well, we can start charging you something. Maybe not the final price that we'll charge once it's really full featured, but we'll charge you something. And of course, once someone spends at least $1 on something, then you really have proof that they want it. If they're not willing to spend money for it, then you're probably on the wrong track.
Yeah. And sounds like this philosophy has really shaped what you do at Ascendle based on the way you guys position yourselves. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you speak to clients in that regard?
Yeah, I think some people get a little surprised when we start talking about them because instead of talking about technology, the first thing we ask is, how are you going to make money from this? They'll come to us with an idea, whether it's something on the back of a napkin or just something they've been kicking around or a fully fleshed out UI mock-up of what they want to build. And they're fired up to talk about features and functionality and technology. And we say, hold on a minute. Why are you going to do this? If you spend $1 to $3 million building this thing, how are you going to generate 10 to 20 to 30 million? If you're going to spend 1 to 3 million and you're going to make 500,000, well, what is that going to give you? Is it going to give you some other outcome in some other area of your organization? And if not, well, I'm not sure if I would want to spend 3 million and get 500,000. That might be a bit of a problem if it turned into a 2 to 3 year development effort, for example. So that's where we start. We start with, well, what's the actual business case and ROI story for what it is that you're going to do? Not that we're trying to be difficult, but we need to understand that because we need to then make sure that every single day that we're helping the client, whether we're helping them just with the strategy up front or getting into building what it is that they need, we need to understand that every single minute, every day, we are pushing against that goal, which is then going to be delivering measurable return on that investment. Because otherwise, we're just wasting their money.
And how do clients typically respond to that? Does it excite them more about the project?
It depends. In some cases, we find that the client hadn't really applied that level of rigor. And so it becomes a little uncomfortable. Like, well, we don't need to talk about that. Let's just start building something. And we say, well, I mean, we could do that. But here's the concern. If we spend a bunch of your money and then we get to the end and you don't actually A, get it into production and B, get it used and C, make money from it, then we're going to look bad because now we become an expense as opposed to an investment. And we don't want that to happen. So, but it does start with a more altruistic goal, which is we really do care about our clients being successful. A little bit of self-preservation built in there, but at the end of the day, we want to feel good about the good work that we do. So sometimes there's a little bit of a thorny reaction because it's work and it requires some tough thinking to go through that. In other cases, they say, we've outsourced things in the past and no one's ever actually asked us that question. And I'm really glad you did, because what that demonstrates to us is that you get why you're actually here, which is to help us push against this strategic outcome.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. What kind of companies do you typically work with? And what makes your process stand out compared to the typical dev shop model, aside from what we just discussed?
We've worked with companies across the spectrum from a startup where it's one person with an idea and we become their development team to the Fortune 50. Our sweet spot tends to be those companies in the call it 100 million to $500 million revenue range or a division of a multi-billion-dollar company. They typically have the big plans and the big problems that we're sort of equipped to solve. We are not a firm where there are some simple problems where you can kind of take them and throw them over the fence and send them off to an offshore team and it's fine. What we tend to work on is highly strategic initiatives, and that requires a lot of personal interaction with our US based team members. And it's always not quite known or not always quite pinned down up front. So there's a lot of pivoting in true agile fashion, and we need to be able to respond to that. So that's typically what we're looking at, that size company or division of a bigger company, where they have some sort of strategic digital initiative, whether it's helping develop some new features for one of their products where they may have 20 development teams, but they're all busy working on other aspects of the product and they have a new customer commitment that they need to get done to secure some more revenue. Or it could be a new complementary product that ties into their legacy system. Or it could be sort of a multimodal, so to speak, approach where it's across their website and their perhaps a physical product and their digital presence as well. But the common thread is if it's digital and it's strategic, and it absolutely has no room for failure, then it's a target for Ascendle.
Yeah, that I noticed that's a big thing, that no room for failure. And you guys like to guarantee that, even going so far as to say, if we don't deliver business value, it's free. That's obviously not something that you see every day. How do you make that level of confidence work operational?
Well, it's really hard. And sometimes, we don't get it quite right. We do have a guarantee if we do some work over a couple of weeks and we show up and it's not really what you were thinking, then we invite you not to pay for that. The good news is no client has invoked that guarantee. I've invoked it a few times as CEO of the company. I've looked at it and said, you know what? We didn't quite hit the mark. So, you know what? I'm not going to charge you for this 2 week sprint, or maybe I'm going to charge you half because we really should have gotten more done. And we do put our money where our mouth is. That creates a tremendous amount of pressure internally at our company because we have to be on it and 100% all day, every day. And so we work all the time on incremental improvements. We know that we're not perfect, but as Vince Lombardi said, if you strive for perfection, you'll stumble upon excellence. And in fact, excellence is one of our core values.
So how do you determine if a project is a good fit for your company? What does a high complexity, high visibility engagement look like?
Yeah, again, it sort of exists across the spectrum of idea on a piece of paper to delivering and measuring the outcomes in terms of putting something into customers or users' hands. So the typical project is going to be that we have either a lack of bandwidth, a lack of expertise, or maybe a combination of both in order to execute against this. And again, it's something that's too critically important and strategic to just sort of toss over the fence to a swarm of developers that don't have that level of sophistication. All of our leaders have 20 plus years in this business, and we've sort of what's that that farmers insurance ad, we know a lot of things because we've seen a lot of things. So that's where we are. I like to say if you're betting your career potential on this initiative, then it's probably a good time to call Ascendle.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's a good place to segue into our next topic. So you've been around since the days of the Commodore, right? The pace of technology change right now, from an outsider's perspective, someone who's not technical, it seems really crazy and wild. How do you view it, given that you've been through a lot of these boom and bust cycles and some of these other bubbles where it seemed like technology suddenly exploded? How do you view this current era?
Well, it's exciting. It's a lot to keep up with. But I think, as you say, it's really been the entire history of technology. We have certainly a big acceleration right now as it pertains to generative AI. It's a little bit of the Wild West. Folks are trying to figure out, well, how do we apply it? How do we apply it to our products? How do we apply it to our internal processes? How do we enlist the help of AI as an assistant, which I think is probably what most of us are doing popping open ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever your favorite tool is and putting a query in and saying, can you help me out with this? And of course, it spits out something that's mostly correct and I can fix it up and then I can use it. So a huge, huge leap forward. But again, we've always had those different leaps forward. So I think the challenge is what it's always been, which is how do we take the new technology? How do we leverage it while always keeping in mind what are we doing to help our customers? So I think that even more than ever, we need to make sure that we remember the human side of things, which is, again, it's the reason I got into the business. I think it's the reason that a lot of us in technology enjoy the business, is because at the end of the day, we're doing our work to help the human side of things. And so making sure that we actually talk to our customers and understand, as we share the capabilities that we're learning about as technologists and we're talking to our customers, we make them aware of, these are some things that we can do. Here are some of our ideas of how we might be able to apply that. Is there anything that jumps out at you? Is there anything that gets you excited and says, wow, I didn't even know you could do that, but if you did, that would be pretty cool. And then we can start building some of those capabilities in true Agile fashion, build a little bit, show it to people, have them sort of get their fingers on it and try it out, and then see if the value is truly there. I think the danger that we have is if we just jump into technology for technology's sake and just shove a bunch of stuff in there and give it to our customer, because then all of a sudden, what can happen in the worst case scenario is the customer says, whoa, why are you giving me a bunch of crap that I didn't ask for? And you can actually damage your relationship with the customer. You think you're being absolutely progressive and adopting this new technology, while the customer is looking at you and saying, where's that thing I asked for a year ago? Like, this AI stuff is great. I guess it's neat or cool. Some of the 4-letter words that I like to talk about when we're talking about product. I mean, this is neat or cool, but I want the thing that I asked for a year ago, because that's the thing that's costing me an hour every day. It's actually costing me time, my perception as a user. It's costing me more time to use your product because I don't have this capability that I asked for a year ago. So I think the word of caution I would have is absolutely embrace all of the new technology, get your fingers into it, learn about what it can do, talk to your customers about what capabilities, but don't forget about what happened over the last 3 to 5 years with your customer base. Some of those customers might not be happy right now, and you're not going to make them happier. In fact, you may make them less happy if you start focusing on the new shiny stuff and ignoring what they're asking about related to the more boring stuff.
So do you see that issue more coming from your team side, being excited about a new technology and wanting to implement something into a customer's product that they didn't necessarily ask for, but you think would be valuable? Or do you see it more coming from the customer side, where they're seeing the shiny new thing and trying to come to you and be like, we'd love to implement this in our product. We don't really know how, but we want to have AI, or we want to have this new shiny thing. Where do you see that coming up most?
I think it's a little on both sides of the coin. So our job, of course, is to keep up with the latest technology, to dream up ideas of how we can use it. And then we view our job as well as to ask the customers, ask our clients those questions, like I mentioned earlier, which is, well, what are you trying to achieve at the end of the day from a P&L perspective? How is this going to help your company make more money? How are we going to delight customers through this idea that you have? And in some cases, they may say, well, we don't really know. That's why we're talking to you guys at Ascendle. In other cases, they may say, well, yep, we're definitely going to add this chat bot to our product. We're dropping everything. We want you guys to, work with us side by side to do this. And in that case, we get back to those fundamental questions, which is why and what outcome do you expect? And again, many times they've thought that through, and here's the hypothesis, and we say, awesome, that's great. Now we are understanding what you're after. We can align with you and we can charge ahead. The other thing is that many times clients come to us because they don't want to saddle their existing development teams with the somewhat experimental brand new thing, because they are in fact listening to their customers. They're working on that backlog of requests from the past year that's going to make their customers happy, or maybe allow them to bridge into a new market. And then we can come in and we can spin up a team in a few weeks, and we can actually build that new shiny thing, and then we can help them get off the ground with it. They might push the pause button with us and say, you know what, this is great, guys. Let's have our customers experience it for a while. And then if it looks good, maybe we'll come back to you, have you build some more, or why don't you help educate our team and they're going to take it over. So we can be a little bit of a skunk works for them as well.
Okay, very interesting. How has your team taken advantage of AI? Are you doing any of the development, or is it any of the code being generated by AI? Obviously, there's a lot of concerns or skepticism about that. So, how do you feel about AI generated code, and is that part of your process in any way?
We do utilize AI tools in our coding process, but we use it very carefully because it is easy to say, well, just generate this 1,000 lines of code and I'm sure it's fine. That hasn't matched our actual experience. Where we are today, I think the evolution of the tooling is we've had assistance with our coding for some time, where I'd start typing something and it would suggest an autocomplete for me. Hey, is it this function that you're thinking about? And yeah, it is. And then, okay, by the way, here are the various parameters for the function. Let me help you, write some of the code. So we've had that capability for years and years, even before the Gen AI revolution, or I would call it more of an evolution, I think.
Mm.
So where we are today is that autocomplete sort of capability has just gotten a lot smarter and a lot more full featured. It's not a panacea. It's not a silver bullet. I can't sit back with my coffee and as a programmer and say, oh, well, this AI is just going to write everything for me and it's going to be perfect. So I think what we see is, like all tools, it takes the expertise of somebody and it makes them more effective and more efficient, but it still requires that expertise. I think the other danger that we have is assuming that we don't really need seasoned developers anymore, because I can just take a junior developer and pair them with AI and assume that AI is the seasoned developer. But what we see is actually the opposite. If we have a junior developer with very little experience, they can get themselves into trouble pretty quickly with the AI tooling. So
Mm.
instead, what we would like to see is, well, keep those senior developers on staff, work with the entire team to leverage those AI tools. Again, an even better autocomplete than we've had over time, and absolutely leverage everything that we can to eliminate some of that tedium, some of that sort of detailed work that's very repetitive and doesn't really need a lot of expertise, but make sure that the expertise is there to ensure that we are cross-checking and examining that code that AI is generating and making sure that it's actually correct, it's secure, it adheres to our coding standards. So trust but verify, leverage the tools as much as you can, but just realize, and I think this especially goes for executive leadership, just realize that it's not a silver bullet. You're not in a position to lay off all of your developers and replace them with AI. That does not exist today.
Mhm.
So it's going to make your really good developers even better. It's going to be an assistant for your junior developers, but it's not going to turn a junior developer into somebody that can create the type of code that has the security and the extensibility and the maintainability that you need when you're betting your livelihood on the code that you're producing.
Yeah, definitely. How has timeline expectations been impacted by these changes in technology, both internally as to how quickly you think you can get things out the door, but also externally from client perspective, because they're also seeing that these things exist and they probably are thinking that, well, this can be done a little bit faster than it used to be.
There are certainly areas that go faster. There are things where we historically have spent more time as human developers that I would say it's the type of coding that doesn't absolutely require a human to be crafting every single line, where you can get some assistance with that. It's probably let's just call it between 5 and 20% enhancement in terms of the throughput, depending on the type of work that you're doing. If it's super simple stuff that's very repetitive, then maybe it's closer to the 15 to 20% end of things. If it's something where this really requires some deep thought and this is strategically important coding, well, maybe that smarter autocomplete is helping me increase throughput by 5%. It's not in a position where it's increasing our throughput 50 to 75%. And what remains is making sure that we're building the right thing, because what we don't want to do is leverage AI to go in the wrong direction faster.
Yeah.
That would be a big mistake. And what we see is the constraint on most of our engagements is not the raw production of code. It's typically making sure that we understand what we're building, why we're building it, and ensuring that there's alignment around the communication around those things, so that when we produce that code, which regardless of what AI tooling you use, it's still costly to create code. The worst thing that we can do is create the wrong code. And we create the wrong code by not understanding what it is that we're trying to build. It's by allowing ourselves to kind of slip back into our waterfall days of not really making something work every couple of weeks and showing it to people, even if it's internal stakeholders. We sometimes fall into this trap of going away for 3 months and no one ever sees it. And then we come back and we realize that was the wrong thing that you guys just built for 3 months. So I would say that the problems today are not raw coding speed. I think the challenges that we continue to see today are around communication, asking those questions I talked about earlier. Why are we doing this? And how is it going to make us money at the end of the day? And then ensuring that we continually are in alignment, making sure those stakeholders show up every 2 weeks to the sprint review and they look at what we're doing and they tell us that looks right, or that kind of looks right, or that doesn't quite look right. If we know that after 2 weeks, we can course correct. I think all too often what I see is stakeholders kind of disconnect after an initiative gets launched, or gets started rather, far from product launch. And then all of a sudden things go off the rails and they say, well, I thought it sounded good at the beginning. Well, if you completely disconnect and you're not there along the way to kind of help with those course corrections, you have to inspect what you expect, because if not, you don't have any sort of guarantee that the folks that are working on your product actually understand how to detect if it's going off track. In all fairness, they don't. They don't have the context of all the various stakeholders. So that's a long way of saying that speeding up your coding does not solve your problems.
Do you use AI tools at all for rapid prototyping? So ways to get something out quickly, just as an example or a baseline to give the client some idea of what direction you might be going in?
I think that's one of the most exciting uses of Gen AI, to be honest, is I would call it a little bit of a combination of brainstorming and prototyping. And the brainstorming could be as simple as, I mean, I've used this in some of my little side projects that I work on. Generate some sample data around this. And it goes and generates a bunch of realistic looking sample data. And then I could say, all right, well, help me generate a prototype around this concept. And so we're diving into Gen AI across everything from accounting and HR to our development teams and our product folks, leveraging the tools, but being careful to remember that, as one of our team members says, it's a really efficient unpaid intern. They don't know everything. They're eager. They're willing to help out. There's a lot of work that they can do. But again, you need to make sure that you understand that there's limitations to the capability, and it's not a panacea and a magic silver bullet. So leverage the tooling across everything, including rapid prototyping, brainstorming ideas, and then let's just apply our hard-won knowledge and wisdom to what the outcome actually is, or the output actually is from the AI.
Yeah, in my experience, the generative AI when it comes to coding is a little overeager sometimes.
Yes.
You'll see it going way off the rails or getting way too excited, getting way too ahead of itself, and that's something that can definitely be a problem. So, do you typically see clients come in fresh, they've got the idea and they're coming straight to you, or have they maybe gone through other agencies or other teams or even tried internally to build things first and fail?
We do see a few different variations. In some cases, they've done some sort of engagement with a less sophisticated outsourcing group where it just was not the best fit. It was something that was a little bit too intricate and complex. And they kind of they kind of set that group up for failure because they just tossed it over the fence. And they spent a few months, and then what they got back was just wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't at the level of quality that they expected. Certainly nothing that they could put into production. So that's an expensive lesson to learn. The other thing that we see probably most often is we've been talking about this for 2 years, and we just can't quite get around to it. And that ties into the lack of bandwidth, lack of expertise, or maybe some combination of both. And so they come to us, and I mean, they had the right idea. This is super strategic, absolutely has to work right. It's not something we can just kind of toss over the fence and offshore. So, but we haven't gotten around to it. We have so many customer commits that it just never became a priority. And that's a really great place for us to plug in, because when those initiatives live on for some time and they keep wanting to do it, that means that it's sort of been pressure tested internally and it's still a good idea. And that typically means that it's pretty strategic. And then in the third case, it's they haven't pursued it internally. They kind of know that they don't have the bandwidth or expertise to tackle it themselves. They've heard about us. We start having conversations. We start helping them out. Oftentimes, when we engage with a client, we help them out with something for free just to give them an idea of what it's like to work with us. And anything we can help with, whether it's taking a look at their strategy, maybe coming up with some ideas, taking a look at a technical problem that they're faced with. And then we crawl, walk, run, start with maybe some strategic planning for them and outlining over a couple of weeks what the strategy might be, asking those questions. Why are we doing this and what's the ROI? We might write a lean business case for them, which they can then circulate internally and use that sort of as a defense to get the budget. But those are the three variations where they might have had a bit of a stumble with a traditional outsourcing group. They're just a little bit stalled out. Maybe they're starting and stopping on an initiative, or they realize that they need some expert help.
Do you ever see a prospect end up walking away after you get into the really nitty gritty about the business aspect of it and realize that it's not a project that's worth pursuing?
In some cases, yeah, when we ask those difficult questions about why and what's the ROI, in some cases they realize, the ROI actually isn't there. And as much as we would have loved to have built it, it would have been a mistake. And the last thing we want to do is waste our clients' money. The other thing that sometimes happens is we work with, a smaller company, or maybe even someone who has an idea, and we help them flesh out their idea. And then they need to go shop it and see if they can get some funding. So, and of course, getting funding is not something you can snap your fingers and make happen. But in some cases, they've gone and secured the funding, and then they've come back, and we've given them that experience of working with us, and we've been able to help them out. In some cases, I've actually, and some of my team have gone in front of investors and explained what it is that they're trying to do, and actually acted sort of as their virtual chief product officer or virtual chief technology officer, and lent some more credibility. But that's on the smaller side of what we do. Typically, we're working with larger clients, but in some cases they want to examine an idea, and then they kind of take a look at it and decide, and maybe it wasn't quite worth it. Or in other cases, we might spend 3 or 4 months and build some sort of initial MVP version of a product, and then they go to market with it, and then they need to do a little bit more work to find some customers. So they might push the pause button with us. But then they call us up once they secure some customers, because now they have a different problem, which is this customer wants it, but they want some different stuff in the product. And we still don't have the bandwidth, even though we thought we did, to spin up a team to tackle this.
Yeah, that validation is definitely crucial. So, to close things out a little bit, where do you see things going from a technology standpoint, and where do you see things going from a business standpoint for Ascendle specifically over the next 12 to 24 months?
I think from a technology standpoint, we'll continue to see Gen AI develop. There's a lot of interest in it. I think we'll start to see some of the players fall by the wayside when they can't make a business out of it. I think it's still a little bit of in the hypothesis stage in terms of that question I was asking earlier. How are we going to make money? And I think that we will see, as we're already seeing, the process of creating these large language models and training them will continue to get less and less expensive, which probably is going to tie into the economic model of how these companies will make money. And I think we'll simultaneously see a combination of the capabilities increasing, as well as the creativity around how do we apply this technology in different ways. So I think it's a really exciting time. I think we'll see the capabilities continue to increase so that more and more of that easy stuff, as far as coding goes, will be able to be handled. More of the, like you talked about, the rapid prototyping and ideating around ideas and getting something more quickly, leveraging AI to kind of have our backs, looking at things like security and extensibility and consistency, all the non-functional requirements.
Mhm. Mhm.
And from our perspective, I think the opportunity for us is to stay on top of the new technology. One of the reasons I like this business is because we have an excuse to keep up with all the latest and greatest. I came from a product company background and it was great, but we built products and then lived with them for 10 to 20 years. And although we were doing new things all the time, we weren't doing brand new things all the time across a variety of different industries. So that's one thing I didn't mention is the industries that we focus on tend to be high complexity, highly regulated, no opportunity for failure types of industries, which ties right into our sweet spot of what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dave, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Where can people find you?
Well, you can find us at ascendle.com. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect, always open to having a conversation about anything and everything. I love to learn, and I especially love to help people.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot. And for everyone listening, please be sure to subscribe, leave us a review. And as always, keep pitching, keep building, and keep scaling.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pitch, Build, Scale. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast provider so you never miss an episode, and we'll see you next time.